Hi everybody, welcome to topic 1 of Unit 3. This is a unit I call When It Matters Most, and it's a fun one. It's one we're looking at all kinds of ways in which the scaffolding we built in Units 1 and 2 about IFs and sporting bingos, about NGOs and IGOs, about governments having sports ministries or caring about what happens in sports, and certainly about individuals and countries worldwide being interested in what happens to the fortunes of their sporting teams. That's all built out, and now we can talk about specific cases of when it might be even more important and where those relationships take place. Some are just through familiarity. You play a foe often enough and it might raise to different levels, but ownership of certain teams matters, qualifying matters, the kinds of regime you have matters. There's all kinds of ways in which these come up, and we'll look at them in the various topics in Unit 3. Today we're looking at colonial neocolonial ties. Colonial ties are one of these that sports offers a really nice avenue for potential victory over a former colonial master. Colonialism denotes formal political control of one territory by another country. And whereas we've largely ended colonies in the 21st century, there still are a few, and if you're curious, you can send me an email and I'll give you a link to the list of non-self-governing territories. It's a short one. But that doesn't mean that all feelings are good or all feelings are bad about those former partnerships. We're going to look at formal political control as one of these places where those scenarios and situations where heightened feelings may exist. The other is neocolonial control. So that could be either a relationship where a big country broke up and the largest piece of that former country still acts as that in the role of the former national master. Case of Russia and the USSR, for example, or it could be overt economic or other kinds of control that a big country imposes on a smaller one. These would be neocolonial relationships, and in sports, these encounters offer heightened matchups, heightened feelings as we go forward. And where we want to start then is with this map of 1945 and the colonies that were extant in the world. So anything that's in blue was an independent country when the United Nations was founded in 1945. This is not, the other colors represent then colonies. Now, this is not a complete list because if you went back a certain number of years, you'd find even more of the world colored in. For example, the former Spanish colonies that were in the Americas are here independent, but you probably are aware that Spain had colonized and Portugal had colonized much of the Americas and that they were independent long before 1945, but that relationship still exists on into the past. So a lot of this is certainly a case study in what becomes possible. So one of the commitments the United Nations made in 1945, the countries that formed the United Nations, they would engage in a process called decolonization. And we looked at it a very little bit in the last unit with Ghana as the first one of these independent African countries in 1957, and how Kwame Nkrumah, the leader there, used sport as a way to define the nation. But because of the way international tournaments work, that means that Ghana could have a chance to play against England, or the United Kingdom, which was its colonial master, in various situations and scenarios in a variety of ways. So all of these represent potential matchups where the stakes are heightened if the former colony plays the former master. So in the 2006 World Cup, for example, Angola, which is down here in red, which was a Portuguese colony. Portugal's up here. They played each other in the World Cup, and even though Portugal won, it gave the Angolans a chance to encounter them on a field, not a field of battle, but a field where a lot of that rhetoric gets shared, and it meant an awful lot of concerted attention at home in Ghana. So this is one of those places it plays out, and sometimes it's glorious. Sometimes the Angola in this story win. So today I'm wearing my Senegal jersey. I wish I had this badass Senegal jersey that they wore in the 2002 World Cup. So there's a map on the side here which shows where Senegal is and where France is. In 2002, France was the defending World Cup champion. They'd won the 1998 tournament. Senegal was a first-time participant in the World Cup, and they happened to play France in the opening game. So the opening game of the World Cup goes to either the defending champion or to the host country. This was a peculiar situation where there were two host countries. Japan and Korea both hosted. Long story for another time. So the defending champion hosted, and Senegal played them. So the eyes of the world are on this game in ways in which only the World Cup final gets more attention from a larger part of the world. And when Senegal wins, It's a big deal for a lot of reasons, one of which is Senegal had been colonized by France. And interestingly enough, there were celebrations in the streets of several French cities. Why? Because in that post-colonial relationship, it's often true that the main destination for migrants from the former colony is the former colonial master. So the second largest population of Senegalese in the world is in France, and they were celebrating wildly. We'll talk later in this unit about that sort of question of identity through immigration and how one adapts to their new country, roots for their old country, etc. But this match is one I will always remember, and so will the Senegalese and probably the French as well. It's an example of the attention that can come and the opportunity that can come for this kind of thing to happen. One of the ones, it regularly happens that England faces its former colonies in cricket, often, as in recent years. Sri Lanka, former English colony, has won the World Cup, the Cricket World Cup. India has, further in the past, the West Indies and the Caribbean have, Australia, etc. So they offer lots of opportunities. The next one we'd say is as neocolonialism is a little bit different, right? So you didn't have direct political control. The United States didn't control Central America and the Caribbean for the most part. There were some incursions of U.S. Marines to control customs houses as part of Theodore Roosevelt corollary in the early part of the 20th century, which, again, I could give you information on if you needed or were curious. But what this map shows is the relative spread of wealth in the world. And one of the ways that the North, which is now obviously enlarged in these pictures, the North gets its money is by taking resources from the South, and that goes way back several hundreds of years. But it creates this relationship in a North-South dynamic where a lot of the money's in the global North. That means when the countries in the global South get to play them, they can use that as a chance, as an avenue for, if not revenge, then of one-upmanship or comeuppance. You can have that be level. It's one of the reasons why in 2.6 last unit, when we listened to some of those radio or television calls of the Mexican broadcasters or the Honduran broadcasters being so happy with the United States, that it was so peculiar, because this is one of those relationships where the United States has dominated in the region for a long time, and this gives them a chance through neocolonialism to have those sporting encounters, whether it's at the Olympics or in a track and field event or somewhere else. Now, the colonial relationship, this one, tends to be of countries in one part of the world with countries in another. Same thing here. You're talking about North to South. But the truth is that most sporting matchups come not in the World Cup. So the World Cup's this nice little symbol here in the middle. But they come during qualifying. They come during regional tournaments. So it's this sort of thing that can matter even more than those, because it comes up more often. So here you've got the 6 soccer federations that are by region. So you're actually going to play these folks more. Senegal's going to play within Africa often. So Senegal can play against West Africa, East Africa, North, South, etc. in the CAF. That's the Confederation of African Football. So in the African Cup of Nations, they play there all the time. And in qualifying the World Cup, they play there all the time. France isn't present, right? So you don't get that chance very often. So it's more common that these games within your region matter more. And so there's where you look at maybe post-conflict. Depending on how a war ended, those kinds of feelings can last a long time. They'll draw people to play against each other often. Or it means that these sorts of former political structures that emerge can be particularly relevant. So here's 2 pretty important things that happened in the 1990s that continue to persist today. And one is the breakup of the Soviet Union from 1 state into 15, and the other is the breakup of Yugoslavia from 1 state into 8. And because it's common, soccer is common in these regions, they often play each other because they're members of the same federation. So some of that stuff, they could meet in an international matchup, but they'll also meet more regularly because they're in the same regional confederation. So what that means, right, is that here, Senegal plays in CAF. France plays in UEFA. So in qualifying for the tournament, which happens once every 4 years, they're actually playing other people in Europe or other people in Africa. They can only come together if circumstances align perfectly, because the likelihood that France would play Senegal with 32 teams in 8 groups. I'm sorry, yeah, 8 groups. There wasn't a lot of odds that would happen. It's much more likely they'll play in their own region. So these countries being drawn to play each other, when it used to be that Serbia, which has Belgrade, which was the capital of Yugoslavia, kind of inherits that mantle of how Yugoslavia, the wider country, held them together against their will. Similar for some of the countries in the USSR. Moscow rests, the largest city of the USSR, capital of the USSR, rests in Russia, and so those relationships matter more. Okay, and they'll come up in qualification. They could come up in a World Cup, but it's more likely they'll come up in qualifying. And even beyond that direct political control that you have there, you have some neocolonial relationships as well. So the Soviet Union, like the United States, had a bloc of allies. Unlike the United States, that bloc of allies was held together often through force and invasion. For example, Hungary, which was in the Soviet bloc, Czechoslovakia was in the Soviet bloc. They were both invaded at one point by their allies, quote-unquote purported allies, the Soviet Union, to put down democratic uprisings. Those are not forgotten, and you'll see later in this unit a particular event where water polo, which is a sport that matters in the Balkans, in the former Yugoslavia. There's a gold medal water polo match that happens between Hungary and the USSR against the backdrop of the Hungarian Revolution that's put down brutally by the Soviets. It's called the blood in the water match, and so that was while they were quote-unquote allies. That means later, if they play each other, this heightened feeling, they remember this stuff. So here you have 3 examples of how this has played out in recent vintage. Let's start with the top right. How about those uniforms? They should have their own unit in 1-7. I should have a slide for this. You're going to watch a film for this class called The Other Dream Team that looks at the Lithuanian basketball team of 1992. Lithuania was a Soviet Socialist Republic. They broke away. They're one of the first to break away, and they love basketball there. It is absolutely in their sports space. And so when they beat them for the bronze medal in 92, it matters. Slovenia had been not a republic, but had been in the Soviet bloc, beats Russia for the last spot in World Cup 2010. This Ukrainian track team finishes ahead of Russia in a 4x relay. These events happen all the time, and it gives the former bloc that opportunity. Well, I want to pitch another perspective briefly in the last couple of minutes we have left, and that is a way in which to maintain friendly ties through these other kinds of competitions. So one of those would be the way the Commonwealth acts. So this is a map of the Commonwealth of Nations, and these are all countries, not an exclusive list, but all of these are countries that have been controlled by the United Kingdom or England at one point or another. And so you could have Australia, you do have Australia, you could have the United States on here as well, but we're not part of the Commonwealth. So the Commonwealth is a group of former British colonies who do things together periodically. It's an attempt by the British to maintain positive sets of relationship, because the question is, what is their responsibility? Do they just run and hide and never engage again? Do they give them better trade deals? Do they transfer technology? What do they do? Well, one of the things they do and have done since 1930 is something called the British Empire, then the British Empire and Commonwealth, and finally the Commonwealth Games. So these are a version of the Olympics, but only for countries in the Commonwealth. So they get together and they have sporting competition. Yes, then there's a direct opportunity to beat the English time after time after time in those games, not just accidentally in another tournament when they get drawn together, but directly. But they also foster positive things, right? They're going to do positive interactions and maintain those ties in a friendly way. There's a variety of other these games. So the Jeux de la Francophonie is a French version of the Commonwealth. They play together. In the Americas, we have something called the Pan Am Games. Asia has an Asian Games. There's an African Games. They exist in most regions for, they have these sort of multi-sport events that play out. So there is a sort of another picture, another story of how it's positive. But the extent of these, there's so many colonial and neocolonial relationships. There's so many post-situations like the Soviet Union or Yugoslavia where countries have been allied and now they're not, that the qualifying, the regional tournaments, the regional games, and then the World Cup and the Olympics provide lots of opportunities for these, and they matter more. Those charged matchups come from these relationships and a variety of other places that we'll continue to study here in Unit 3.